Hey, this is Dan Conrad with Protect Termite and Pest Control out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I am, and you should, be listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am your host, Frank Hernandez, here every day discussing all things pest. And I want to remind everybody to join the Pest Geek Society. Join the revolution of what's happening in the pest control industry. Join us on Facebook, Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group. We're also on Twitter. We're on YouTube, pestgeekpodcast.com. Join us. Join in on the conversation. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you need to be more successful. Contribute, engage. And now here's Jeff McGovern with today's topic.
Why, thank you, Frank. Folks, this is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. And I've been traveling a lot the last couple of weeks. I think I've racked up 3,000 miles plus on my transit. And I still have another 1,200 to go before I get back to Florida. But in my travels, I've been seeing some pest issues. And I thought, you know what? I probably ought to talk about some of them. And one that struck me, because in the last few weeks, I found myself in a number of big box stores. And I'm talking Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, and that kind of thing. Grocery operations of different companies. And it struck me that there were, again, a large number of small bird problems in a lot of those locations. And depending upon where you are and what part of the country you're in, you're going to get harassed for that a little bit more or a little bit less, depending upon the makeup of the health department and of the general public that lives and shops in those particular stores. You know, a worst case scenario that I dealt with a number of years ago was at a big box store in Alabama. And there happened to be an individual that was a regular shopper at one of those big box locations that had a horrible phobia about birds. And this individual was also a prominent individual in the community. And so every time they walked into this big box store, and one of those nasty little English sparrows flitted across her vision up high in the steel or something like that, or possibly she even heard the birds twittering and tweeting in the store, she was on the phone calling the health department saying, you have to get the birds out, this is terrible, and it created major havoc for that particular retailer. But also, you have health departments where the presence of a single bird inside the store could cause you some major headaches. And then the other problem is you run into folks that are bird lovers and they don't want the birds harmed in any way, shape, or fashion. So you've got birds in these big box stores that are getting in a lot of ways just like flies, because they're having penetration issues into the building. You know, cart tunnels, doors open, that type of thing, and the birds fly right in. And in some cases, we know that the birds have learned how to use the automatic door openers, because they flutter around that opener, the door opens, the bird dives into the building. And of course, what does it find inside? It has harborage, it has a food source, it's a comfortable temperature, and I believe in some of these stores we actually have generations of birds making the attempt to live there. Now, as far as dealing with them, there's a variety of ways you can do it. There are some very effective bird traps. One in particular is the bird trap that was recently introduced by Bird Barrier. It's kind of a tawny brown color. You have the ability to add a bird call to it. And the nice thing about the device is you can place it, and then in the zones where the birds are active, you need to scope that out and go ahead and set it up, and don't allow it to trigger. Just go ahead and put food there and get the birds used to coming to the device. They'll land, they'll feed, they're fat, dumb, and happy at that point. And then when you see that there's activity coming right to the device, you go ahead and set it, and you can sometimes pick up one or two at a shot that way. And once the trap fires, it changes shape dramatically enough so that even a knowledgeable store employee can contact the pest control company and say, hey, the trap on top of whatever, one that you've placed in this particular spot, has indeed fired, and that would indicate that we have birds inside. So we have the opportunity to get those birds out, and frankly, in some cases, we need to look at relocating them, which basically means driving them miles and miles away and releasing them, because they're creatures of opportunity, and they'll actually take up residence someplace very convenient, very similar to where they were in many cases. But at least that way you're not being blamed for killing the sweet innocent bird. So, but you have to take that into consideration. Another method that I really like, and this is something we designed many, many years ago with the help of Sam's Club, because I was doing a lot of work for Sam's, and at that time, this would have been the early 1990s, we had mist nets. And mist nets are very, very fine, very large nets. In some cases, they're, say, 10 feet, 15 feet deep and 40 feet long. And a mist net of that type will easily fold up and fit in a sandwich baggie. So we're talking something that's almost hairnet-like in configuration. But they're used by ornithologists to capture birds for study and that type of thing. And they're very, very effective, if somewhat delicate, but if you take care of them, they'll last a long, long time. And one of the things we looked at was using mist nets on poles. And so in other words, you would string the mist net between two poles that were portable, and maybe on the end of the poles you had hooks or magnets or some type of way to hook them into the high steel. And so it looked like a giant badminton net that you could move from place to place and then capture the birds in flight. They work extremely well. And over the years, developing techniques for the use of these nets, it generally requires two people. It's better with two. One person can use a mist net series, but it's a little bit more difficult to do that, and it's a little bit more convenient to have two individuals on site in the process. The nets are very easy to set up. The best of the extendable poles that I've ever seen are the ones from Bird Barrier. And Bird Barrier is also involved through another company that they own in the window washing industry. So their expandable poles are top-notch, high quality, and they do not flop around. And that's what you need when you're doing a mist net set. And normally on the side of the net, on each end, there's a series of loops. You put those down over the pole. You can affix them in place with a small piece of duct tape, and that way you can easily remove it and prepare the net for the next job. And when you put the net on the poles, you want to put a series of pleats in it, folds, if you will, that run the length of the entire net. And that way you've got a place for the bird to hit the net and tumble into, and they get tied into those fibers and they can't get out, particularly a small bird like a sparrow. So what you want to do first of all is do a proper assessment on the site and locate the areas of sanctuary and travel the birds are using. Normally there's a pattern, and if you talk to the employees at the location, they will tell you where they see them the most often or something like that, and you build a process based on where the birds are moving. In other words, you want to catch them to and from harborage or to and from very common feeding zones. And normally what I like to do, most retail stores, this seems to work well. There'll be a sanctuary area the birds return to. I'll put a stationary mist net there on poles, of course. We go ahead and undo the nets, put the poles up, put a stationary net there. And then we may station another stationary net in the site based on that travel pattern. And then we'll have a mobile set the two of us will handle and move from place to place. You can do this with one person, as I said, but it's a lot easier with two. And then once we get the nets in place, when we begin the process, you can harass the birds with a laser pointer or a strobing flashlight. Just be careful not to point it into somebody's eyes, obviously. But once you get the birds moving and they panic a little bit, they're going to slam right into those nets and get caught. And then all you have to do is bring the net down carefully, lower it, and get a hold of the bird's legs. Find out which, you have to look and see which way it went in. And then once you get a hold of the bird's legs, you can actually go ahead and unravel and get the bird out of the net. Every now and again, you have to cut them out, and a few holes in the net aren't going to hurt anything. I mean, it's still going to be usable for some time, but I like to try and untangle them, get them out. I've got them secured by the legs. I'm holding them up high and, high toward the body. And then I can place them into a holding cage. And sometimes what we have found is if I get a sparrow or two in a holding cage, I'll take that holding cage and place it behind one of the stationary nets. That brings more birds into that zone that get caught. I guess they're trying to come over and find out what the birds are doing in that cage. Who knows? But I do know that it brings more in over the years, and we've done this with the experiences we've had. That seems to work pretty well. Now, when it comes to numbers, I've gotten as many as a dozen sparrows out of a building with mist nets in very short order, provided we're able to figure out the distribution of the birds and the travel pattern. And I've always done that with at least two guys. Working by myself, and I've gotten my 2s and 3s out. Now, how fast can you catch them? I remember one particular incident. We had a grocery store, and this was on the East Coast, and this was a grocery store without the high ceilings. So the birds' travel path was very, very limited. And we were in the process of getting the net set up, and we noticed a pattern that the birds had where they would fly across the store and they would duck and dive under signs and such. And in the process of doing that, we just kind of figured out the pattern. And I remember in one case, we had just got the net set up and a bird came across the store, and the two of us lifted the net. As the bird came toward one of the aisles, boom, it was in the net. And that was the only bird in the store. We had it in the cage and out the door, and we had that bird job done in like 6 or 8 minutes. It was just one of those situations where everything came together, and it happened very, very quickly. But the use of mist nets can be very effective if you spend the time to look at the process properly, and you also need to take care of your equipment. I mean, if you're not being careful with those mist nets, you can get them all tangled up and make a complete mess out of them. And you don't want to do that. They're not cheap. But once you learn the process of using those mist nets, you'll be very effective in getting these small birds out of buildings. Now, obviously, you've got to look at corrections to the penetration points. And that's just part of the process. But once they get inside and they learn that store, it's extremely difficult to deal with them without the use of mist nets. And frankly, what's a good combination is to mist net and use the trapping boxes as well. Because once you have a complete process, you're going to be more successful. And then, of course, do the coaching necessary so your client truly understands where the birds are getting in. I mean, I've had situations where everybody told me it was secure, and I simply walk around the back of the store, and they have the plastic strips hanging in the doorway, except that 2 and 3 sections of them are missing. And when you've got 6-8-inch sections, 3 or 4 feet long, that are ripped loose from somebody improperly going through with a forklift, you may as well have the door open. The birds simply walk right in. The other thing you have to watch is if they are using things like plastic strips or strip screens, so that way you can get more ventilation in the work areas in the back. Make sure they're hung flat across the opening, because it does no good whatsoever to put up strip screens and plastic strips if you're leaving gaps on the side 6-8 inches long and wide, because the birds will walk right in those areas. So the coaching process with your client, looking for the penetration zones, utilizing the mist nets, utilizing the trapping boxes, you can build a process to get these small birds out of the building. And with the understanding, you're going to price this normally by man hour with a minimum rate. That's generally the best way to do it. That way, everybody is treated fairly, from the client all the way to the technician. And remember, in everything having to do with pest control, we have to take care of the tech. Happy techs mean happy clients. Unhappy technicians mean unhappy clients. So the key person many times in pest control is that tech. So folks, this is Jeff McGovern, the Pest Coach. A little bit of a review with bird control for sparrows in big box locations. You folks have a wonderful day, and Frank, I'll turn it back to you, sir. Y'all take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.